this concern about the global economy, not just going into a recession and popping back out, is being, I think, intensified by the concerns about debt, which are now in the U.S. You know, this question about a debt limit, pushing back against a deficit that gets bigger and bigger and bigger. We don't always connect that to the rest of the world. But besides what it means for the U.S., what kind of reverberations does it create?
Hi, Kathleen and Paul. It's huge because it's so big in terms of not just the U.S., but also Japan and Europe with big government debts. And then as those roll over, it absorbs capital from around the world. So as you think about how much profit or how much capital can the world create in a given year, and how much of it is used up as governments look to continue their support programs, that's the spillover. As I look at the developing countries, it's hard for them to get the investment capital that they need to restart growth.
Now, you had firsthand experience with debt, growing debt limits, et cetera, during your years in the Reagan administration. Are there parallels now to that time that also inform where the world situation is?
Two that I'll mention. There's the uncertainty about how do you get through the debt limit increase. I worked on those in 1986, 1987, and then into the future. And there's political uncertainty, largely because the money's already been spent. So how do you find the political way forward? That's critical. Do you get any spending restraint that's connected to it? That's also critical. The world looks at it and wonders what the U.S. is doing with raising the default risk over and over again in the news reports. I think there could be a rewrite of the debt limit so that it actually had some kind of check and balance effect on spending. But that seems difficult to achieve right now because of the intensity of the politics. So as we look at it, then there's also the direct effect on developing country debt. In the 1980s, it was first the Latin debt crisis, then the Brady Plan itself, the workouts that went on through the 1990s, and we're back there again with a lot of the developing countries. You were just playing challenging stories on Peru and Pakistan. They have debt, and throughout Africa, there's heavy debt burdens that need to be restructured.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about some of those developing countries. And as you mentioned, we heard from Pakistan's Prime Minister, or former Prime Minister, Imran Khan, talking about how the country's already defaulted on parts of its debts. We've got inflation there running at its highest in 24 years. When you look around the world, which countries do you feel are at risk of default right now?
There are many of them that are facing high risk of debt distress or are actually in debt distress. There's a process that goes on both between the World Bank and the IMF, also through the G20, and we're trying to really strengthen that process to make it work. I was pleased to see Secretary Yellen, US Treasury Secretary in Africa this week, really focusing attention on the urgency of moving forward on debt restructuring. I was in China in December with IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, and we had important meetings really with China Exim Bank and China Development Bank. Those are two of the world's biggest creditors on how to push forward with a process. When a country hits the wall in terms of debt sustainability, there has to be a way to work through it and get them moving forward. Such, for example, in Zambia, where there's a lot of focus right now.
Yeah, do you think China is being as constructive as it could be when it comes to restructuring debt in countries like Zambia? And is this a source of frustration for you in any way?
It's It's frustrating that creditors haven't gotten together and really made progress on a restructuring. It's Zambia's been at it for 2 years now, and it's important to make progress. They might be able to do that over the next couple of months. China's asking lots of questions in the creditors committees, and that causes delays. That strings out the process. So I think it's important for them to be focused on getting to an actual debt restructuring where the burden can be lightened. For Zambia, this is a country that's gone through a lot of its own internal improvements, and it's a country that's singled out as needing to move forward with a reduced debt burden, so there can be new investment into the country. I think that's what's important right now, and they need to take steps in the next few weeks in order to unlock that potential.
I want to run a couple of things that China wants out of this, David. That they're delaying. They have requests. They're delaying this restructuring of Zambians' debt because they want to have the Southern Africa, the nation's local currency debt held by foreigners included in a deal. That's according to US Treasury official. And they also want the World Bank and the IMF to start taking losses in restructurings. How do you respond as the president of the World Bank to these kinds of requests from China?
To the latter point, as far as World Bank and IMF taking losses, there's not a mechanism to do that. So that, in part, is a delaying tactic, or it slows down the process. That's been discussed actively at the G20 and rejected as a direction. So I hope they'll move on from that. As far as the first point, the domestic debt of countries is subject to their own laws and possibilities as far as whether they can restructure that domestic debt, and that's been taken off the table by Zambia. So for it to be brought in here at the late innings is again slowing down the process. There needs to be agreement on the perimeter, and then move forward with the debt restructuring quickly, because the burden on the people of Zambia is so heavy right now.